What is going on, guys? Evan Preco here. You are watching SG1 Sports Big Ten Football. We have our Week 12 recap in this video, and we're going to start off with number 14 Wisconsin at Nebraska. The final score of this game, Wisconsin won 37-21, and for the Badgers, Jack Cohen went 13 of 21 for only 162 yards and a touchdown pass. Jonathan Taylor had himself a day. He had 25 carries for 204 yards, averaging just over 8 yards a carry and 2 touchdowns. A.J. Taylor was the Badgers' leading receiver. He had 2 receptions for 65 yards, averaging 32.5 yards a catch and a touchdown catch. Wisconsin ran the ball for 320 yards, and they had 482 total yards of offense and 1 turnover. For Nebraska, Adrian Martinez, he played okay. He went 13 of 23 for 220 yards, 1 touchdown pass, and 1 interception. Rushing-wise, he played pretty well. He had 16 carries for 89 yards, averaging 5.6 yards a carry and a touchdown run. Dedrick Mills had himself a good day as well. He had 17 carries for 188 yards, averaging just over 11 yards a carry and a touchdown. Kanawai Noah was their leading receiver with 3 receptions for 72 yards, averaging 24 yards a catch, and J.D. Spielman was just behind him with 4 receptions for 71 yards, averaging 17.8 yards a catch and a touchdown catch. Nebraska ran the ball for 273 yards, and they had 493 total yards of offense. So they were able to out-yard Wisconsin overall, but that would not be enough for them to score enough points. Offensively, this is a Nebraska team that played pretty well, in my opinion. They did. They played well, especially in the first half. They made it a game. It ended up being 27-14 Wisconsin at halftime, but for the first quarter and for half of the second quarter, Nebraska was moving the ball, and they were getting some stops on defense. And then the third quarter, Wisconsin took a big lead, 34-14. Nebraska would score one more time to make it close, and then Wisconsin would kick a field goal to make it 37-21, which was still a 2-possession game, but that would end up being the final score. So, I mean, they out-yarded Wisconsin. They ran the ball for a ton of yards. They almost got 500 yards of offense. The problem was there were a lot of drives where they moved down the field, and they couldn't finish. They'd get inside the red zone, and they'd get stopped. There was one drive where they ended up missing a field goal. That was not, I don't want to say a chip shot, but it was definitely makeable. And then there were 2 or 3 drives. I think there were 3 drives where they got inside the 15 or the 10, and they went for it on 4th down on all of those, and they got stopped each and every time. And the problem with that, the reason for why that happened is because of how thin they are at running back. Dedrick Mills played so well. He played so well, but they really used him as much as they could. I mean, he must have been gassed late in the game. So Wyatt Mazur was the guy who would get the carries on a lot of those 4th downs. They screened it to him on the 4th down, and he just got tackled 1 yard short. And I'm pretty sure that Dedrick Mills would have, forced that tackle to be broken, and he would have gotten a 1st down and possibly scored. So the depth at running back definitely hurts them because Wyatt Mazur, who is pretty much their emergency back, is their number 2 guy right now because they don't have Maurice Washington anymore because he got kicked off the team. But they were still able to run the ball well. So that's pretty positive for them. I mean, they had 2 weeks to prepare for this game. They threw the ball better than they had in the past few weeks, but they still have a lot of stuff to work on for Adrian Martinez. Next week, Nebraska plays Maryland. And even though the Huskers have gone on, I believe, a 4-game losing streak right now, I think that should be a win for them because of how much Maryland has fallen apart here. And then they finish the season with Iowa on Black Friday. And I'm going to say this. If they can play around with Wisconsin, which they did for most of the game, if they can play around with Wisconsin, they can definitely play around with Iowa because Wisconsin beat Iowa. As far as Wisconsin, Jonathan Taylor had a fantastic game, obviously. The defense looked okay. Nebraska's offense gave them some issues, but the defense was able to make big stops and have big sacks and force turnovers on downs when they needed to. So they stepped up in the clutch, which is more important than, how many points they give up in garbage time. But no, overall, I think that they did some positive things, and they, definitely have a lot of stuff to work on. And so right now, Wisconsin moves to 8-2. And the path for them is looking good because Minnesota ended up losing. They control their own destiny. So if they win out, if they beat Purdue next week and they beat Minnesota after that, they're in the Big Ten championship game. And if they win that game, who knows what's going to happen? If they win it, at least they'll go to the Rose Bowl. they could even get something better. I'm not sure. I guess we'll figure that out. But yeah, it's a good win for Wisconsin. Good 16-point win on the road in the conference in a place that definitely has a lot of energy, a hard place to win. So yeah, it's a good win for them. And let's get on to the next one. Next up, we've got Indiana at number 9, Penn State. And the final score of this game, Penn State 34, Indiana 27. So it was close, and it was a pretty interesting ball game. For the Nittany Lions, Sean Clifford went 11 of 23 for only 179 yards and a touchdown pass. Rushing-wise, he had 10 carries for 55 yards, averaging 5.5 yards a carry, 2 touchdown runs. Journey Brown was their leading rusher, however, with 21 carries for 100 yards, averaging 4.8 yards a carry, and a touchdown run. KJ Hamler was their leading receiver. He had 2 receptions for 52 yards, averaging 26 yards a catch exactly. Penn State ran the ball for only 192 yards, and they only had 371 total yards of offense. I shouldn't say only, that's quite a bit. And they turned the ball once. For Indiana, Peyton Ramsey went 31 of 41 for 371 yards and a touchdown pass. Rushing-wise, he had 12 carries for 31 yards, averaging 2.5 yards a carry and 2 touchdowns. Stevie Scott III was their leading rusher. However, he had 17 carries for 54 yards, averaging 3.2 yards a carry. Ty Freifogel was their leading receiver. He had 5 receptions for 131 yards, averaging 26.2 yards a catch and a touchdown catch. Indiana ran the ball for only 91 yards, but they did have 462 total yards of offense. They turned the ball over twice, however. One thing that really impressed me is how much Indiana out-yarded Penn State, and Penn State has a fantastic offense. It amazes me that Peyton Ramsey threw for as many yards as the entire Penn State offense was able to pick up. And I just think that's amazing. The way the game went, Penn State scored first. They scored a touchdown after they recovered a muffed punt, and then Indiana would answer for a touchdown pass to Freifogel to make it 7-7. Jake Pinniger would make it 10-7 for Penn State with a field goal, and then Peyton Ramsey would quarterback sneak it in to make it 14-10. And then Sean Clifford would run in a touchdown to make it 17-14, and they would tag on one more field goal to make it 20-14, and that would be the score at halftime. Journey Brown would score a touchdown run in the third quarter to make it 27-14, and Indiana would answer with a field goal to make it a 10-point game. They would score again in the fourth quarter on another Peyton Ramsey quarterback sneak to make it 27-24. And then Sean Clifford would basically end the game scoring a touchdown run with under 2 minutes to go to make it 34-24. Indiana would drive down the field, kick a field goal with about 13 seconds left. They would not get the onside kick, so Penn State would technically survive. And I thought this would be an interesting game last week coming into it, and it was. It was a very interesting game in my opinion. It's a good bounce-back win for Penn State after the loss to Minnesota. I did expect them to play a little better on offense. I did expect Sean Clifford to have a better day, rebound after his horrible performance against the Golden Gophers. But he did enough to win the game, and that's all that matters for right now. So next week they're going to be playing at Ohio State, and that should be the Big Ten game of the year, in my opinion, because that has huge implications on the Big Ten East. Indiana, next week they will play Michigan. Michigan will go on the road to Bloomington, and that should be a pretty good game too. Michigan is playing really well right now, pretty dominant. But Indiana is a good football team, and I think that Michigan going on the road, playing at Indiana, it could brew some trouble for the Wolverines. You never know, because Indiana has proven themselves as a contender, and so they're playing really well. So I'm looking forward to that one as well. Indiana falls to 7-3. So they're still going to make a bowl game. They're not going to win the East. But at this point, they're competing they're either going to go into one of the little bowls or they'll make a decent bowl game, not a New Year's Six bowl, but they'll get into one of the more decent ones like the Citrus Bowl or the Outback Bowl or something like that. But it's a good win for Penn State. Indiana will be just fine. And then they finish the year against Purdue. So we'll see how they end up finishing the year, and we'll see what happens later. Speaking of Michigan, we've got the Michigan in-state rivalry, the Spartans at the number 15 ranked Wolverines. And the final score of this game, Michigan destroyed Michigan State 44-10. And for the Wolverines, Shea Patterson had himself a day. He went 24 of 33 for 384 passing yards and 4 touchdown passes. Giles Jackson was their leading rusher. He had only 2 carries for only 32 yards, averaging 16 yards a carry exactly. And Ronnie Bell was their leading receiver with 9 receptions for 150 yards, averaging 16.7 yards a catch. Michigan ran the ball for only 83 yards. They had 476 total yards of offense and 1 turnover. For Michigan State, Brian Lewerke went 17 of 30 for 166 yards, a touchdown pass, but 2 interceptions. Elijah Collins was their leading rusher with 12 carries for only 27 yards, averaging 2.3 yards a carry. Cody White had 6 receptions for 78 yards. He was their leading receiver, averaging 13 yards a catch exactly. Michigan State ran the ball for only 54 yards. They had only 220 total yards of offense. They had 2 turnovers and they only scored 10 points. The way the game went, Michigan State ended up scoring first. Max Rosenthal, one of their fullbacks, caught a touchdown pass from Brian Lewerke 1 yard out. Michigan would end up tying the game with a Hassan Haskins touchdown run on a direct snap. And then Michigan would score again and kick a field goal right before halftime. So it wasn't a blowout by halftime. It was 17-7. But then the second half, Michigan exploded. They scored, They scored 1, 2, 3, 4 touchdowns, and Michigan State only scored a field goal. So they got outscored, I believe, 28-3 in the second half. And boy, did Michigan play well. It's so weird for me to see Michigan's offense play well without them running the ball. Because in the past few weeks, their bread and butter had been running the ball with Hassan Haskins and Zach Charbonnet, and they barely ran the ball at all today. Shea Patterson, who had been a liability for Michigan's offense in the previous weeks, just played his heart out in this game. And Michigan State's defense is decent. They have a good defense. The defense is the strength of their team. So for them to take apart their defense like that is unbelievable. And of course, Michigan's defense is playing very well too. We all know about Michigan State's offensive struggles. And when you put offensive struggles against a really good defense, 220 yards of offense altogether, 2 turnovers, only 10 points scored. Yeah, that's what I'd pretty much expect. I did not expect Michigan offensively to obliterate Michigan State's defense like they did this week. I thought this game would be a little bit closer, but the Wolverines, they're figuring out a way to win. Jim Harbaugh has done a hell of a job ever since the loss to Wisconsin and the loss to Penn State to get this team back in a top 15 ranking, and that's where they're at right now. They're number 15. They'll be ranked differently by the time this video gets released. But right now they are ranked number 15 in the college football playoff. So they're playing fantastically right now. Next week, they're going to play Indiana, and then they're going to finish it with the game against Ohio State. Now, I mentioned how the big game of the year in the Big Ten would be Ohio State-Penn State. But hey, with the way Michigan's playing right now, this Ohio State-Michigan game in Ann Arbor could be a good game. Could be a really, really good game to watch. I'm not sure if it will have that big implications on the Big Ten East. I don't think Michigan will win the Big Ten East because they would need to beat both Ohio State. They would need Penn State, to beat Ohio State, and then they would need to beat Ohio State as well. So Ohio State would have to lose their next 2, which I don't see happening. And then they would have the same record as Michigan if Michigan beats Indiana. But then what about Penn State? Michigan lost to Penn State. I don't see them winning the East, but I definitely see them possibly going to a New Year's Six Bowl. Like they went to the Peach Bowl last year against Florida. I could see them going to the Orange Bowl this year possibly because they normally put a good Big Ten team in there. And yeah, we'll see what happens. They could go to the Rose Bowl. Let's say Minnesota or Wisconsin make the Big Ten championship game and they lose to Ohio State. Ohio State will go to the playoff, and I'm not sure if they're going to put the loser of the Big Ten championship in the Rose Bowl because normally you want to put a top 10 team in there, and I'm not sure the loser of that game, if it's a Big Ten West team, will stay in the top 10. So they could put Michigan in the Rose Bowl, but that's a bit of a stretch. We'll end up seeing what happens with them. As far as Michigan State, it's just another bad loss for them. You think about last week when they had that big lead against Illinois, and Illinois came back and won, and then they get crushed this week. Michigan has lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They've lost 5 straight games. They're 4-6 right now. They were 4-1, and they have just completely fallen apart so far this season. And they're barely hanging on to a bowl game right now. They're 4-6. Next week, they're going to play Rutgers, and then they play Maryland after that. So they could easily win these next 2 games. They just got to, regroup and realize, the competition that they have coming up, work hard, and they should be able to win these 2 games, in my opinion. and then they'll be 6-6, and they will go to a bowl game at the very least. But it's just been another disappointing year for them like it was last year. For Michigan, they're on a roll right now. I don't think anyone saw them playing as well as they are now after they lost to Wisconsin. But yeah, we'll see what ends up happening with them. We'll see if that Indiana game does turn out to be as interesting as I think it does. And if Michigan wins that game, we'll see what happens against Ohio State. All right, we've got the University of Massachusetts at Northwestern. The final score of this game, Northwestern handled Massachusetts 45-6. For the Wildcats, Aiden Smith went 7 of 13 for only 76 yards and 2 interceptions. Rushing-wise, he had 7 carries for 47 yards, averaging 6.7 yards a carry. Evan Hull was their leading receiver. He had an amazing day. He had 24 carries, 220 yards, averaging 9.2 yards a carry, and 4 touchdown runs. Riley Lease was their leading receiver. In fact, he was their only receiver. He had 7 receptions for 76 yards, averaging 10.9 yards a catch. Northwestern ran the ball for 334 yards, and they had 410 total yards of offense. They did have 3 turnovers, however, 2 interceptions and a fumble, and they had 4 total team fumbles, only one of them losing. So they have to work on ball handling, definitely. For UMass, Randall West got the starting quarterback. He went 19 of 36 for 175 yards and an interception. Bilal Ali was their leading rusher. He had 16 carries for 66 yards, averaging just over 4 yards a carry. And Brennan Dingle was their leading receiver. He had 4 receptions for 66 yards, averaging 16.5 yards a catch. UMass had 83 total rushing yards only, and they did have 310 total yards of offense, only 1 turnover. And it was kind of a slow start to this game, if I'm going to be completely honest. UMass scored the first points off a field goal to make it 3-0. Northwestern would score their first touchdown off a blocked field goal return. They returned it all the way, 85 yards, and then to make it 7-3. And then UMass would tack on a field goal to make it 7-6. For a bit of this game, until like halfway through the second quarter, it was a close game. It was 7-6, and then Evan Hull showed up. And then they started scoring a bunch of touchdowns. It ended up being 21-6 at halftime, and they ended it with 45-6 as the final score. This doesn't really change anything for Northwestern, in my opinion. It's a good win for them, I guess, to put their heads up. It's the first win they've gotten since week 2 when they beat UNLV. But yeah, there's nothing, this doesn't really change the way their season's gone or how talented or skilled they are. Next week, they're going to play Minnesota, and Minnesota will probably win that game. And then they finished in-state against Illinois, and Illinois should win that game as well. We'll see what happens. But right now, Northwestern, they improved to 2-8. So I guess a confidence win for them, hold their heads up high, play pride for the university, and we'll see how they can finish the season. For Massachusetts, they fall to 1-10 on the season. They haven't had a good year at all. So it's not like Northwestern beat one of the better non-Power 5 schools. UMass, they're 1-10. They have 1 win against Akron, 37-29, and that's it. So, yeah, Northwestern won. They're still not having that good of a season, but a good confidence win for them, and we'll see if it'll give them confidence in their next couple games, especially with how hard of a team they're going to be playing next week against Minnesota, so we'll see what happens in the future for them. Next up, we've got number 2 Ohio State at Rutgers. In the final score of this game, the Buckeyes beat Rutgers 56-21. And for Ohio State, Justin Fields went 15 of 19 for 305 yards and 4 touchdown passes. Rushing-wise, he had 3 carries for 30 yards, averaging 10 yards a carry. J.K. Dobbins was their leading rusher. He had 17 carries for 89 yards, averaging 5.2 yards a carry and 2 touchdown runs. Chris Olave was their leading receiver, and he's had a great season so far. He had 4 receptions for 139 yards, averaging 34.8 yards a catch. Benjamin Victor had a good day as well. He had 5 receptions for 68 yards, averaging 13.6 yards a catch, and 2 touchdown catches. Ohio State ran for 217 yards, and they had 594 total yards of offense. They did turn the ball over twice, however. For the Scarlet Knights, Johnny Langan went 12 of 26 for 121 yards, 1 touchdown pass, and 2 interceptions. Isaiah Pacheco was their leading rusher. He had 16 carries for 50 yards, averaging just over 3 yards a carry, and a touchdown run. Bo Melton was their leading receiver. He had 3 receptions for 57 yards, averaging 19 yards a catch exactly, and a touchdown catch. Rutgers ran for only 110 yards, and they only had 231 total yards of offense, and they turned the ball over 3 times as well. This game was a lot closer, in my opinion, than I thought it would be. With how well Ohio State had been playing, I thought this was going to be a complete massacre. But Rutgers, their offense, I mean, their defense didn't play well, giving up almost 600 yards and 56 points. But their offense, they scored 3 touchdowns on them. They're the second team this season to score 20-plus points on Ohio State. So that really says something, in my opinion. Able to score 21 points. This game was never really close. The closest it was at one point was when Rutgers scored a touchdown to make the score 21-7, and it was 21-0 beforehand, and that's the closest it really got. So Ohio State handled them. They really did, and they looked well. Defensively, it looked like Rutgers found some holes in their defense, and I'll give a lot of credit to their offensive coaching staff. I think that they did a good job prepping for them this week because they scored 21 points on them. And Ohio State's defense had looked just absolutely phenomenal in all of their other games, so it's definitely a good look for them. Next week, Ohio State's going to play Penn State, and then they play Michigan after that. So Ohio State's next 2 games are going to be really good games, in my opinion. For Rutgers, they're going to play Michigan State next week, and then they're going to finish at Penn State in State College. So we'll see what happens with next week's game. I'm expecting Michigan State to win, and then I'm pretty sure everybody's expecting Penn State to beat Rutgers in the final week of the season. Rutgers played pretty well, and we'll see how everything works out with them at the end of the year, if they can win either of their last 2 games. I doubt they're going to win their last one, but we'll see if they can end up beating Michigan State. And then for Ohio State, these 2 last games are going to be some pretty good ones, so we'll see what happens against Penn State, and we'll see what happens against Michigan. If they win next week against Penn State, they've got the East wrapped up. They're going to win the East, so we'll see what happens with them. Last up, we've got the biggest game in the conference this week. Number 8 Minnesota and number 20 Iowa. Final score, Iowa knocks off Minnesota 23-19. And for the Hawkeyes, Nate Stanley, he went 14 of 23 for 173 yards, 2 touchdown passes. Tyler Goodson was their leading rusher. He had 13 carries for 94 yards, averaging 7.2 yards a carry and a touchdown run. Tyrone Tracy Jr. was their leading receiver. 6 receptions for 77 yards, averaging 12.8 yards a catch. Iowa ran for only 117 yards, and they had only 290 total yards of offense. For Minnesota, Tanner Morgan went 25 of 36 for 368 yards and a touchdown pass. Rodney Smith had 14 carries for only 46 yards, averaging 3.3 yards a carry and a touchdown run. Tyler Johnson had a great day. He had 9 receptions for 170 yards, averaging just under 19 yards a catch and a touchdown. Minnesota ran for only 63 yards, but they did have 431 total yards of offense. They turned the ball over once, however. And the way this game went, it was pretty much all Iowa in the first half. They ended up scoring a touchdown on their first possession. They went for 2 and failed, so it was 6-0. And then Tyler Goodson would score a touchdown to make it 13-0. Minnesota would tag on a field goal, but then Iowa would score again to make it 20-3. And Minnesota would kick a field goal as time expired in the first half. So the halftime score was 20-6 Iowa. In the third quarter, Minnesota adjusted. They scored on their first possession to make it 20-13. In the fourth quarter, Iowa would kick a big field goal to make it a 2-possession game. And then Minnesota would score again with about 3.5 to go in the game. They missed the extra point, so it'd be 23-19. Iowa would run some clock but give the ball back to Minnesota. And Minnesota would throw an interception on 4th down to win the game for Iowa. And this is a huge win for Iowa. They're ranked number 20. And to be able to beat the number 8 team in the country is huge. They move up to 7-3, and Minnesota falls to 9-1. And I know a lot of Gophers fans are upset because, you're not undefeated anymore, and that game would have sealed the West for you. But they still have a lot to look forward to here. They're 9-1. They were the number 8 team in the country, and they lose to number 20. The playoff rankings of this week will come out by the time this video is released, but I don't think Minnesota is going to drop that much. They might drop to 11 or 12 because some other teams in that area lost as well. So we'll see what ends up happening. I don't think they'll drop too much. So let's say they drop to probably 11 or 12. If they beat Northwestern next week and and 1 or 2 upsets happen, they'll probably move up to probably number 10 or 11. And then if they beat Wisconsin in the Axe game, they'll move up a couple spots from that definitely. And if they win the Big Ten championship, they will definitely fly up in the rankings after that a few more spots, and that should put them in the playoff. I think an 11-1 Minnesota team that wins their conference championship should make the playoff. So, yes, it hurts, but this could be good motivation for the Gophers. You never know. So, I think that they still have an extremely bright future. They do have to win out. They cannot afford to lose any more games. So, we'll see what ends up happening with them. For Iowa, next week, they are going to play Illinois, and Illinois has obviously been playing well over the past month, and then they finish on Black Friday against Nebraska in Lincoln. And Nebraska, if they beat Maryland, will be fighting for bowl eligibility in that game. So it could be a tough game for Iowa, especially if Nebraska has the motivation of trying to get to their first bowl game since 2016. So yeah, we'll see what ends up happening in that final game. And then for Minnesota, obviously, they play Northwestern and then Wisconsin. And Wisconsin will probably be that Minnesota-Wisconsin game will most likely decide the Big Ten West. And not only the West, but the Axe as well. And I know Wisconsin fans are very upset about losing the Axe for the first time in 13 or 14 years. I think that was even more than that. I think 16, 17 years possibly. So they will definitely have a ton of revenge on their minds as well. So we'll see how the Gophers can handle that. But yeah, that pretty much does it for all the games that we've had this weekend. So before I end the video, I will talk about my subgroups that I've done. So for the elite, we've got Ohio State, of course. We've got Penn State. We've got Minnesota still, because they are 9-1. And then I decided to add Wisconsin to it. Now, a lot of you guys are going to say, why Wisconsin? They have two conference losses on their belt. Yes, but they do control their own destiny. If they win out, they win the West. And if they win the Big Ten championship, I think they could make the playoff. Look, right now they are ranked number 14. And in front of them are number 13 Baylor and number 12 Auburn. Now the rankings, like I said before, the rankings will come out before this video is uploaded probably. But I do believe that both Baylor and Auburn are going to drop. Wisconsin will move ahead of both of them. So they will move to at least 12. I don't see Minnesota dropping that much. So Minnesota might be 11 and Wisconsin will probably be 12. So let's say Wisconsin is 12 and Minnesota's 11. If Wisconsin beats Purdue and Minnesota beats Northwestern, then they should, and a couple top 10 and one or two top 10 teams lose, you never know. We should see Minnesota probably be ranked either like 10 or 9, and Wisconsin will probably be ranked like 11 or 10 when they face each other. So they could both be top 10 teams. One might be 10, one might be 11, but the winner of that game will definitely move up in the rankings. I guarantee it. And then if they win the Big Ten championship game, either against Ohio State or Penn State, that team, whether it's Minnesota or Wisconsin, should be able to make the playoff. I can definitely see a 2-loss Wisconsin team in this situation make the playoff if they win out. If they win their last 2 regular season games and pull off a major upset in the Big Ten championship game, I think that Wisconsin or Minnesota will make the playoff if that happens. So that's why I put Wisconsin in the elite, because they control their own destiny, and they technically, in my opinion, I think they're still eligible for a playoff spot. For my contenders, I've got Iowa, Michigan, and Indiana. Iowa, obviously, they're a contender. They're not going to win the West, but they just beat the best team in the West. So I still think that they're a very good football team, and they're going to move up in the rankings. Michigan, because they're a very good football team right now. They've proven what they've done. And I've still got Indiana there, because even though they lost on the road to a very good Penn State team, and they played with them for most, if not all, of the entire game. So I've still got Indiana as the contenders. For my middle-of-the-pack teams, I've got Illinois, obviously, because they've been tremendous for the past month, so they're in there. And then I've got Michigan State, Nebraska, and Purdue. All 3 of these teams are 4-6, and all 3 of them are holding on by a thread. Michigan State needs to win their next 2 to make a bowl game, and same with Nebraska and Purdue. And that's why I have them in the middle of the pack, because technically they can still become bowl eligible. Any of these teams lose any of their last 2 games, they move to the bottom of the conference. And my 3 bottom of the conference teams are Maryland at 3-7, because they will not go to a bowl game because they have 7 losses already. Rutgers at 2-8, and Northwestern at 2-8 as well. Rutgers and Northwestern, neither of them have won a conference game yet this season, and it doesn't look like that either of them will so far. So those are my subgroups right now. I know a lot of people are still shocked that I put Wisconsin in there, but I still think that they're a dangerous football team. They're a top 15 team, and they control their own destiny. And I still think they can make the playoffs if they do the absolute best that they can do. So yeah, that's all I've got for that. Let me know what you guys think. What do you guys think about my subgroups? What do you guys think about the games that took place this weekend? What do you think about future games that are coming up, especially with the 2 games Ohio State has to play? What do you think about Minnesota-Wisconsin game that's coming up? Let me know in the comment section. I'd love to read them. Please give this video a thumbs up. And if you could subscribe to our channel and subscribe to our main channel as well, that would be very much appreciated. I thank you all for watching this video and hope you all have a great week.